Soul on fire after a tragic fire that leads to most of a boy's body being scarred. He strives to live a life that succeeds upon his faith, his family, and all the inspirations that push him forward. And welcome Cinema, where we focus on the film. I'm Josh, this is Simply Cinema. Let me know down in the comments below what you thought of Soul on Fire. Was it good? Was it bad? Or somewhere right in the middle? Or if you're waiting for this review to decide if you're going to see it or not, and taking it right in a positive. Soul on Fire has this spark of inspiration and the elements that will bleed on to show the ignition of faith and how we live to trust in God in all of our standards. It's not heavy on the way it's mentioning God along the way, which will be open-ended to the way it welcomes to a general public audience, while still maintaining the ideas that it's down to earth and maintaining this based on true event of this young boy that is playing with fire and most of his body gets burned and scarred, and it goes through a multiple recovery through multiple months that leads on to trusting in his family, doing all these different hurdles in order to recover, in order to strive to live a normal life again. And there's multiple ups and downs through all these different circumstances, and you're going through multiple different events throughout the story, flashing back, flashing forward through multiple different time jumps of the recovery phase, the actual accident itself, to things of living a life in college, finding love, and also leading on to a forward life of trying to become a motivational speaker when he otherwise is not very public in what he is doing, what he is open about speaking on, for the circumstances that all bleed on throughout the environment, the life that he doesn't feel like he earns the love he needs, which creates this great thematic message throughout the ideas and becomes more prominent within the latter half of the film, but has all the elements that feels like there's so much proper motivations for this story to exist, for all things to feel realistic to the standard that there's a beginning and an end to most parts of what they're going on throughout, and there's a big focus on the recovery phase that ultimately does bring upon some emotions to what you're witnessing on screen. While it doesn't look great, the budget isn't high for this film in order to make it look totally proper, it still has the elements that makes it look good enough to the standard that you may be expecting without making it too overly graphic, but at least having some of those scenes where you kind of are seeing those burns and later on seeing the scars on the body that otherwise could look really bad. But ultimately, what we're getting out of this film is well earned and deserved and could bring upon some inspiration, especially for the right audience. For younger kids, you may be getting and going through life circumstances that are facing it, feeling like you're going through struggles. And for older adults, you still may have the hurdles to jump over on yourself, things you are witnessing in your life now that feel like a bit of a struggle that you may still be able to gain inspiration from, or just be in general having to reflect on your life and seeing all the things that you went through in order to get to where you are today. So I feel it's open to many audience members, and especially in the Christian audience or a general faith-based audience, this does bleed upon the lives of all that it should be going about. While it's open to the faith and welcoming God, it doesn't feel like it's very preachy, too pushy with its message that it's ultimately coming about, which creates an open-ended environment for you to witness with as a whole. Which takes me into the mix moments. There's moments here and there that you could be a little turned off by whether it is too preachy. That is the subjective point of this story, that if you are someone that is not of the faith, this still could be a film that works effectively for you as something that's based on a true story, but with its message, it could be a little bit too much on the fence on whether it is talking too much about God, but overall, I didn't feel like it was pushing that message. It wasn't about evangelization. It was just about this kid getting over his struggles, getting over everything he's doing through post his accident, and leading on to ideas about growing through love, finding a girlfriend, being open to new ideas, and expanding upon growing to another normal life, even without some of his normal ideas and things that he once had when he was a kid. So, going throughout that, there is something that's very open ended, but I won't say it's perfect as a thing for everyone, but there is a generality to this film that exposes itself a little bit more than just being about Jesus, but also still including those because that is an important part to this true story's life about this boy that is of the faith that creates all these environments, and there's things that lead on throughout that I feel there's also some character introductions that could be a little bit better with John Buck, especially played by William H. Macy, that does a good job within his role, but he sort of just appears in the story, which is part of possibly the real story that he just so happens to come about what we're leading on. And there is a connection both within when he arrives to this boy's room to leading on how he is prevalent throughout this boy's life. But unfortunately, there's also some circumstances where it just feels like it could have been integrated a little bit better, introducing his character from the get go in some sort of connection that made a little bit more sense along the way that otherwise didn't fulfill what we're ultimately getting out of it as a full narrative. And there's a few editing beats that are a little offbeat, which is surprising because without throughout the story there's so many other points that feels like while it's covering so much, there's some things that it otherwise could have lost its focus, missed the beats within where it's flowing on, which they did have a few moments here and there, but ultimately for how much it was covering, it otherwise wasn't as much of a negative as I would have expected it to, with all the different circumstances, with jumping back and forth between the accident, what we're getting through the recovery phase within the college life, and other scenes post college, as well as the ideas of when he gets a job and following ideas such as that. And taking it into the negatives, unfortunately, some of the dialogue just wasn't written in the best way, which in turn affects some of the writing, some of the progression, some of the forward movement with this story. That while I would applaud all the editing for how much it's covering, there's also some pieces of a puzzle here and there that this film could have stretched a bit longer with what it was covering, or condensed it by eliminating one of the things, maybe the things about his love life. But while all of that is integral and connected to what it is getting after, I never fully felt like it had a full wave of inspiration flowing down upon me about living your best life, about doing all these proper things, because while there is the full recovery phase that's highlighted throughout through different flashbacks, there's also certain things here and there while it's integrating his love life or doing things about becoming a motivational speaker, it kind of flash forwards to more of that than it does with his recovery, which, while his recovery is the main point of the movie, the fact that you're showing some of the post events leading after that shows there's some importance to that, but it otherwise feels like it's rushing some of those while you are getting the ideas, while you're getting the beginning of, oh, I want to become a motivational speaker, and then you later see that it's not much of what you're getting out of it that otherwise lacks the substance, that lacks the progression, that you see him getting success in certain areas that in real life he did achieve, but you aren't getting the ups and downs, the successes and failures, the ups and doing all these different things that shows the how he did it, or certain things that while it could take too long to show everything, it doesn't even give the minimal substance that would show that he sort of gets through point A to point C with lacking the B point of what we're showing as a whole, that otherwise feels like there's so many different points where it left me feeling a bit perplexed as a whole when I left the theater, because while I like the generalities this film has to offer, there's certain points outside of the recovery phase that otherwise didn't impact me to the fullest extent, which led them to force some of the information to be provided by the dialogue, that these things happen off screen in between the start of an idea and the execution of said idea, that otherwise would have been so much more impactful if it created the whole environment, whether it created that within another film or just demonstrated something a little bit better with a better forward progression of the story, different forms of editing. Maybe it could have been of a chronological plot line from the fire accident leading straight forward through all of these, and still being able to incorporate those time jumps because it's way too much otherwise, but still being able to look at this as a full grand picture. There's just some things where it filled in the lines, but there's other things where it just didn't fully color in the picture to what I would have enjoyed, to where I would have embraced all the emotions so much more, because of all these other different characters that they sort of introduced in a little weird way, based on some of the dialogue, based on some of the writing, that just didn't fully fulfill what I was ultimately looking for out of this film. That wasn't a whole lot, because I was relatively in the mind that it would be relatively predictable, and it did have some twists here and there that I was kind of surprised by the direction and the thematic ideas that it went and dove into. But ultimately, because some of the lines weren't fully filled in, it just wasn't necessarily something that fully gripped me as a whole. So that's just my personal thoughts on Soul on Fire, which I have to rate as simply 6 out of 10. Let me know down in the comments below what you thought of Soul on Fire. Was it good? Was it bad? Or somewhere right in the middle? Or if you're now going to see this film or not, based on my recommendations, make sure to like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe if you haven't already to join in film culture community, where we talk about a lot of cinema as a whole. So that's just all, and make sure to do yourself a favor and go watch a movie.